And we are back live with session 2 of our episode this evening, talking about the history of cannabis with Sorara and Michael. We are very blessed to have you here listening or watching with us, and we have some more stuff to dive into for the second half of our evening. And as usual, it's just casual kind of conversation, so none of this is planned. I don't let them know what we're going to be talking about other than cannabis history, and so we just kind of have an organic conversation. So
cannabis improv.
Yeah. So we'll just go from there. So I mean, we were definitely on some great topics earlier. We have covered a little bit about the history of cannabis. We've dived into that a little bit. We've talked about a little bit in America. We've talked a little bit about our own histories just naturally through kind of being here a little bit. So let's chat some more. So before we dive into more actual history of cannabis, let's learn a little bit more about both of you. Is that all right?
Sure.
Can we do that? All right. I'm going to do him first. I'm going to allow Michael to go first this time.
Sure.
I'm going to watch my wording.
Well said, sister.
I'm going to watch my wording here. So, Michael, would you please tell us a little bit more? It's all live, always. Would you tell us a little bit more about yourself and the company that you have, and a little bit more maybe about really, I think, what got you inspired to want to be in cannabis in general?
Sure. Well, I mentioned it a little bit earlier. I had a pretty positive personal experience that basically kept me in school, kept me on the soccer team in college. It actually helped me achieve success at that level, and that lit a spark in me that opened all sorts of doors and windows, but it basically caused me to do a lot of research on my own, just independent research. You can't go to school for this stuff. You can now, but not when I was in school. They didn't have anything like that, and the internet was just coming out, and there was resources starting to become available. Some of Meshulam's data was starting to come west, and some people were putting it into creative, YouTube videos and various things like that. And eventually I just found my way through it all by kind of digesting as much as I could, really, and then kind of piecing together the consistencies and trying to ferret out the inconsistencies, and that's ultimately how I kind of became, for lack of a better word, a cannabis subject matter expert. And I've kind of used that to get into this industry. I first came out here with an analytical equipment manufacturer as like a regional sales and business development manager, and we were selling more and more of this equipment and these sensors into hydroponics and cannabis applications, especially out here out west. So given my personal experience, I wanted to take a gamble and come out here, so I offered to relocate. My wife and I had only been married for maybe 6 months, and she wanted to take the gamble with me, so we rolled the dice and came out here. And my plan was work my way into the cannabis industry over the course of a couple of years, and it took about 2 years before I ended up in the cannabis industry. And like I said, it started on the marijuana side. I kind of grew frustrated with it all. There's so much against the marijuana side of the industry. I'm sure it gets better every year, like the hemp CBD side gets better every year. But I mean, there's infighting. There's so much stuff, and it's
obstacles you can't imagine.
and it's panic-inducing. We'll just put it that way. And so I just saw an opportunity in the hemp side that really fit with my personal mission as it pertains to this plant, which is to sort of shatter stereotypes and to expose it to people in a way that wouldn't cause them to become instantly closed-minded or defensive about it. And so, CBD being non-psychoactive, and it appealing to a wider demographic of people, old people, young people, everybody in between, they're animals. It sort of really fit what I was trying to accomplish personally. And so I still use marijuana, fairly regularly. I still use CBD pretty regularly. I support both sides of the industry. I support it in ways that I think will move the needle the most. But at the end of the day, for me, CBD has allowed me to really dive into and build some of the relationships that I was hoping to personally build. I'd mentioned during the break working with a a board certified neurologist out of Florida and traveling around with him, basically hearing his presentation over and over again at these ASD shows and these atypical, spectrum disorder shows. And what I learned following people like that around was just phenomenal. I mean, it's not only was I able to learn and pick up a lot just through my own independent study, but to be able to get in early and to follow those people around, I was able to learn a lot about this to the point where I feel like I can pretty much help anybody understand exactly what this is doing. And, it started years ago where most physicians didn't really know about this. Sure. I remember going to a show in Las Vegas that was for physicians. It was A4M, the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. All sorts of physicians walk through there from all different types of, specialties. And most of them, this was 6 years ago, they see CBD up on the sign and like, what's CBD?
Right.
What's CBD? They knew what marijuana was, and they just sort of assumed it was part of the marijuana plant, and it was all murky whether or not it was legal or whatever. But they didn't really know anything about it, but it had staying power, and people kept trying it, and people would go to their physicians. Yeah, and they would go to their physicians, say, my neighbor is using CBD and it's doing this, this, and this, and I want that. And
give me that.
I want those results.
Yeah.
What do you think? And then so these doctors eventually,
they
got on board.
A lot of pressure.
And like I said, I was fortunate enough to align with some pretty high level, professionals that saw the promise of this plant early on and really did a 180 as far as their personal opinion of it. And that's really what led me into consulting and things like that, and helping brands develop their stories, develop their product lines, doing it in ways that are going to be guided by consumer demand, making sure that we're providing third-party analysis so that we're showing that whatever we say is on the label is actually in there. If we say it's broad spectrum or it has more than one cannabinoid, we're showing that in the product with third-party laboratories, not something that we just threw up on a Photoshop and doctored really quick.
Labels are scary though. I just want to say that the labels in the cannabis industry are scary because I feel like, I don't want to say they have to over label right now, but like whatever they use to grow the plant with is supposed to go on, or at least a lot of the companies are putting it on the label. And you don't see that in your food at all.
Yeah.
Like, so if I read something and it has these big scary words.
Correct.
And maybe it's good that I read it to know, then maybe I should not use that product. But then wouldn't I not use any product? I mean, at the end of the day, I'm being serious.
Right,
this is the downside, the lesser of two evils rearing its ugly head.
You said we're not supposed to do the lesser of two. What the heck?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Legalization looks like the lesser of two evils to most people, and so that's why they choose it, because it will take longer, right? What's more evil? Is it taking longer and getting exactly what we want, or is it just taking the table scraps? And so we take the table scraps, and then we have unintended consequences. And one of those is the fact that in this legal market, they're all sort of required to use these things and do this sort of testing and put all this stuff on there. And it's basically very quickly become an oligopoly, especially here in this state. And that's why it didn't pass a few years ago, the first time there was initiatives for adult use.
And I think testing is important. I think understanding your meds is important. But I also think at what point, if we know that more than we know the pharmaceuticals that we're putting in us, or more than we know our food that we're consuming every day, or the water that we drink, if we live in Arizona, hopefully 2 gallons a day. So, I'm just saying, I think it's almost scary again as a patient, right?
Sure.
So, you all have all this knowledge, and I think as someone in the industry, as someone who, it's almost part of your job to know all this information. But as a patient who works like a 9 to 5 or a 9 to 9, and you want to know that it's not going to make you worse, and I think that's the scariest part.
Well, that's the plus side of the legalized industry, is that there is a lot more supervision over the products that come out into the marketplace. If without the legal, then you would have just all the underground, and that's where a lot of the trouble is in the underground. But on the other hand,
I think there's trouble in the above ground too, though.
Yeah.
You hear about the
Yeah.
dispensaries
There
with
definitely
mold. You
is,
hear about, and to me,
All right.
wherever there is money, and I'm just going to be an ass on this one and say it like it is, wherever there's people making money and profit to be made, there are going to be people who cut corners to make more profit.
Yeah.
that's
And
right.
and we're all
Yeah.
business people. Like at the end of the day, we all have to cut some corners, and it's a matter of deciding
Yeah,
which ones you're cutting and which ones ethically work with you, right? Or
Right.
you can sleep with at night. And then
And some people have no ethics.
right. And the saddest part is that again in this industry that is a billion-dollar industry, billions and billions of dollars, there's so many people that are making money off of it that if I fear as a patient who's not making any product. I don't touch cannabis. I don't touch it. I do when I consume it, but I'm not making
Sure.
a product, right? So I don't have a stake in that game that way. So as a patient, it's really scary for me, and it's really, really hard. It's really hard, and I can't say it enough that like it's almost debilitating how overwhelming it is to be a patient in this industry, and the fact that there really is no place to get a solid understanding
Yes.
of meds for you. We can get an understanding of cannabis. We can learn the history. We can get an idea of where it's going. We can talk about laws all day long and different things.
Sure.
But that doesn't really help me understand it with me
I think
or
you,
my issues.
I think you do bring up an excellent point, and it is a tricky environment, and it will remain a tricky environment despite whatever politicians write down and say is law. And the reason for that is there's nearly 500 compounds in the plant. And what's right for one person's genetics and biochemistry is not necessarily right for the next. And so no matter what, there may be a day, let me qualify, there may be a day where we do a cotton swab genetic thing and they say, based on your genetics, this is a fairly typical profile
Of what's really going to
would've-
help you
of
in
what-
this
yes.
specific
Correct.
symptomology.
Of what
Yes.
your ancestry would have been around and what you
Right.
would have evolved your specific system for, and
Yeah.
and here you go, and then we can reconstruct it.
Scientists.
We literally
It's
can
being
reconstruct
done.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're already capturing all this data.
Right,
You know,
that's
Leafly's a
right.
part of this, capturing all this data. One side of it is strain accuracy. So, like right now, there's
there's
not a
that.
lot of accuracy. If I get Blue Dream in Seattle and I get Blue Dream at a dispensary in Las Vegas and I get Blue Dream around the corner,
They're completely different.
and I take
blue
them all to a
dreams.
lab, they're all going to test differently,
Right.
I can assure
That's
you. And
right.
one of the problems is the labs. There's not a lot of standardized
Right.
testing yet. So because there's no agreed upon standard method, there's even shadiness within
Right.
the labs.
Right.
I think it's still safer, generally speaking, to have products that are third-party tested.
Well, and I was gonna say we also have labs that are owned by by the people producing the product.
Exactly.
And then we have labs that are
That's
third
not a
party.
third party, exactly.
Right. And so, and again, as a patient, you are talking a whole lot. This is a lot of jargon. This
Yeah.
is a lot of stuff I gotta
Yeah.
know. Okay, so
But-
not only should my meds be tested, but they need to be tested from a third party. I mean, second party would be okay, but third party's better, and even then, I still got to be cautious.
Yeah.
That's at the end of the day, this is what it
But
is,
here's
right?
the thing. Here's the thing. As a patient, you have the opportunity to learn enough to take care of yourself with this medicine through the system.
But don't we make it, isn't it almost like it's not inviting enough for the people who need it easy? For the mom and
I
pop who
understand.
can
Yeah, I
put a
agree.
pill in their counter and pop it open and know what they need to take? Or for the kiddo who's trying to help their mom and dad and trying to figure out how to help them with Alzheimer's or
Right.
arthritis or any of these things, and there's not this, we still aren't figuring this out. Like, and
Well,
I
we're
just feel
working
like,
on
I
it.
know,
I
but
mean, it's-
faster, god darn it.
Well,
It can only
you know,
go
this is
as-
the difference between, alcohol prohibition and cannabis prohibition. Alcohol prohibition was a pretty short experiment, and it was a pretty bad experiment. I think it maybe lasted 5 or 6 years, if I recall correctly. It didn't last very long, and one of the reasons why it didn't last is back then our federal government wasn't anywhere near as powerful, nor were our local governments.
Right. That's controlling either,
And
right?
exactly, and that's a whole nother problem. But alcohol prohibition didn't really have a lot of these same things. This is Prop 205 in California was 1994 or 96. 96. That's 24 years ago. This is slow going, and and the reason why it's slow.
Well, that's what
We're
I'm
in a
saying. It's taking too long.
It's
taking too long, goddamn.
Because the government needs a generation to pass. It needs time to admit. Because it's never going to really admit. It's just going to let it happen slowly and capitalize off of it via tax dollars. Yeah. It's not going to actually
ridiculous amounts of tax dollars, by the way. On
that's medicine. What I was going to say is that when people buy in California, only like 10% of people that use cannabis are buying in the
because the taxes are too high.
In the dispensaries,
right?
90% are buying in the gray market.
These politicians don't really.
Well, can you blame them though?
No.
No, I don't blame them. I blame the politicians because they're so greedy and they see all this money, and instead of just saying we'll take 1 or 2%, okay, which is really a lot more than they deserve, frankly, given how poorly they've done. They're going to take 20% or something ridiculous, which raises the cost to the consumer because the entrepreneur, he's got to cut somewhere, like you said. So what does it do? It gets added onto the retail price. So the consumer always foots that bill, and that's another downside to that. But where I'm going with that is that as soon as you have these artificially high prices because of the cost of legalization, you end up perpetuating a black market or preserving a black market anyways. Yeah. So what that tells me is that you have to get as near to decriminalization as possible if you truly want to end a drug, black markets in Portugal. I think it's been about 20 years. I think it was 2002 or something like that. So it's been almost 20 years. They completely decriminalized all drugs, and they put in a simple system where basically you get a written warning on your first offense with a small fee. On your second one, you get a higher fee. And then on your third one, you have to go to counseling. And the only way you even get a written warning is if you're publicly intoxicated. So if you're doing it in the privacy of your own house, nobody bothers you. But if you're publicly intoxicated on something, you get the 3-strike rule essentially. But you don't go to prison to learn how to become a hardened criminal and fight for your life and your virginity or whatever.
Our prison system's a joke.
Yeah, you go to a counselor and you know who the counselors are? Most of them are people who've already been a part of this program and who
peer advocates.
Yes, peers. Exactly. They're so proud that they're so happy with this revolutionary change in the way they're handling it that they become role models for people who do have addiction problems and things like that.
We've only started doing that recently in this country, at least here in Arizona. I know we've recently started to do peer advocacy where 20 years ago you couldn't admit that you had previously had a drug problem when you went to a job to work with drug addicts, that you would never say that.
We generally don't treat addiction as a crime. If somebody has a shopping addiction, they don't go to jail for that. If somebody has an addiction to food, we don't put them in jail for that. If somebody has a sex addiction, we don't put them in jail for that unless they do one of the two things that we deem inappropriate, which right now is paying for sex without a camera running and anything to do with children. So but if they don't do any of those two things, we don't put them in jail, right? And we probably should only really whittle that down to one. But we don't put people in jail for addiction except for when it revolves around drugs. And there's a reason for that. It's because it gives local law enforcement more power. It gives DEA, federal agencies more power. It gives more power.
Well, I mean, if we didn't have this war on drugs, there would be no DEA, essentially, right? Like, would you need a DEA if there wasn't? So think. Well, we I don't want to say think about the people who would be out of jobs, because other jobs essentially would be created. Like that's the world. So it's not like that. But
DEA, drug enforcement
they don't.
agency.
But they don't want to be out of that job, right? The person who's the head of the DEA agency certainly doesn't want the war on drugs to go away.
That's exactly what after alcohol prohibition.
How Harry Anslinger went from.
Exactly. That's where I'm going. So getting back to the history here, this is a nice little insert into the history. In 1927, I believe it was, when alcohol prohibition failed and they repealed the 18th Amendment, and they had developed a branch of government or an agency called the FBN, which was the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. It was headed up by Harry Anslinger, and when he had, was 6 years or something into this or whatever, getting a big budget, getting more and more every year, more exactly, more money, more weapons, more trucks, more paddy wagons, more whatever, more soldiers, more law enforcers and whatever, and more agents, I guess is the right word there. And so when alcohol prohibition ended, there was a gap. There was a huge gap.
Yeah.
Do we end the FBN? Do we just seize it as an agency and end it, or
can we transition this over to something else?
So Harry Anslinger, and for fear of losing his power that he had just recently accumulated, in cohorts with someone who had a huge stake in both the paper and the newspaper and the tree and paper, pulp and paper industry. William Randolph Hearst, who's known for quote unquote yellow journalism, which is sensationalist journalism.
Okay. Propaganda.
Yeah, propaganda, basically. They got together and they said, look at, hemp is a couple of years earlier. I can't remember the exact date, maybe 1923. Popular Mechanics came out with a hemp decorticator on the cover saying that hemp was going to be the first billion-dollar industry. And when I did the inflation calculation for that, $1 billion in that year, whatever it was, in 2020 money would be about $25 trillion today.
Wow.
So that's how big the potential for, just to put it in perspective.
Yeah.
That's a big industry.
Yep.
And that's what they were predicting way back then, almost 100 years ago. And so Anslinger and William Randolph Hearst fashioned basically a smear campaign, a fair campaign against the devil's lettuce. Spawned movies like Reefer Madness and all sorts of stuff.
Yep.
Remove the word cannabis.
Correct.
From the papers.
It was removed.
Always marijuana.
It was removed from U.S. Pharmacopoeia, which is essentially a Wikipedia, an encyclopedia of natural medicinal tinctures and things like that. Just wiped everything clean and started bastardizing marijuana. And the congressmen that voted on the Marijuana Stamp Act, when they were later revealed that also included hemp, they were blown away. They were totally shocked.
Right, they had no idea.
They had no idea. They thought they were talking about some new exotic thing. They didn't know they were talking about cannabis sativa.
Wasn't our Constitution originally written on
the Declaration of Independence?
Yes.
I believe the story is at least one of the drafts of the Declaration of Independence was written on hemp paper.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure it's like a steadfast part of history.
But they changed
through
its
and
name.
through.
They changed its name so people had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
So they voted to basically make not available to
the
themselves.
Marijuana Stamp Act was the first step in prohibiting it entirely, but that did
They
allow.
could pay
they would pay.
Fees
They pay an excise tax. They'd have to get this stamp to grow it. And they could use it for certain things like industrial things or whatever, but they had to go through, jump through hoops.
Yeah.
And they had to pay a huge excise tax to be able to grow it. So what did that do? Farmers are not high profit margin practices.
They can't do that.
And this is, a crop that grew pretty easily, but now I can get penalized for having it without having the stamp. So not only did they not grow it, they cleared their land of it to make sure they didn't face any penalties that they couldn't afford. And so we literally and figuratively wiped this country clean of hemp, of cannabis.
And the other thing is the doctors, like he was saying earlier, the doctors, a very high percentage of their medications had cannabis and hemp and marijuana, all the same.
Yeah, I mean, it always
in
said
their
cannabis
medicine.
sativa.
65% of the medicines had cannabis in them. So the patients that were dependent on cannabis medicines suddenly lost their medicines, and many lost their lives.
Wow. That's a part of cannabis history that we definitely don't hear about.
Well, when they teach us about alcohol prohibition in school, they don't teach us how the government actually poisoned hundreds of barrels of whiskey, and it ended up killing, like 2 or 3 dozen people as a result of them poisoning it to try to, enforce prohibition. There's lots of little evils, buried in our history, and we only get that revisionist history. We only get the stuff that makes our country look wonderful.
Look great, right?
And our political leaders,
only the winner's
and our political
story
leaders
gets
look
told.
Right,
yes,
right,
yes.
right.
Win
Well,
is right.
no one is going to. Okay, so, but let's just tap into that for just a moment. Let's just speak honestly about things. So, like, when someone dies, for example, and not to go down that road, but when someone dies, nobody goes to their funeral and says what a shitty human being they were. Everyone goes. Everyone who knows that person, who gave any two shits about that person, goes. And they all lie, I'm sorry, or maybe fabricate, or only embellish, or only focus on the positives and the truths. And I think that when we are talking about history and the writing of history, not so much what you're talking about, which is planned, that's a little bit different, but I think like the writing of history, of course you're only going to write it where you look good. I mean,
from your perspective.
And one where you look good. Why would I have a story of me that made me look bad to the world? I mean,
right.
especially if I've done something good. I mean, I don't want to tarnish this good thing that's being said with a mistake I made at some point. I mean, because it's not like we're all humans and make mistakes or anything, right? So, but like those are things that we don't talk about too, is the fact that like there's going to be flaws in all these systems because we're flaws. And
Right.
and then even like what you're talking about as far as how some of this stuff is planned, and when we talk about America and how we're so good at leaving stuff out, I studied social and cultural pedagogy at ASU, which is the only university in America to study the word pedagogy, which is not really studied here in the States, but very big in most other countries.
What is it?
Pedagogy, it's basically the understanding of why we believe what we believe, but not that. Who benefits from us believing it, right?
Key bono.
Yeah, so who benefits from us believing the things that we believe, and why do we believe them, right? So like growing up, we believe we're supposed to drink milk 3 times a day. Why do we believe that? Well, again, if you look back
the
in
dairy
history,
industry wants us to.
right, you look back, but it's deeper than that. So it actually happened. So the dairy industry kicked up during the wars because milk was an easy thing to send to soldiers with cheese, and they were able to do things with it. And then when the war was over and everyone came
Excess
back,
milk.
now they had all these farms, right? So now they said, how do we fix this, right? And so it wasn't necessarily evil intent behind all of these things either. Like, let's just be clear. Not that it's always good, right? But I think like we as a society don't talk about those things enough. Like, who is benefiting from the fact that we are so ignorant to the
I would
history
have
of
enjoyed that
cannabis,
class for sure.
right?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a whole degree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A degree then.
Yeah, it's a whole degree. You can go take it at ASU right now. It's a master's program. It's great.
Interesting.
But it's and you can look at it in any area of our lives, right? Whether it's your home and the things that you believe at home, or culturally, or when it comes to this plant. And so for me, it just, who keeps benefiting from us believing this? And again, why as a society at this point? I mean, we know who's benefiting, right? The pharmaceutical companies, the government. We know, we've clearly established who's benefit. But then, as a society, now that we know this, now that we can pinpoint that,
But
how
do we know it as a society?
I don't know.
Maybe 50% of us do.
Yeah, I wish
So
I
how
was
do we
that
start to
optimistic,
change it?
but
Oh,
well,
you can't be negative, Nelly. I thought your name was Michael.
yeah, no,
No, I got it. You're fine.
I think more and more people are waking up.
Yeah.
I think more and more people are realizing nobody cares about you as much as you, and I know that's sort of appealing to ego superficially, but it's the reality of the situation, and there is a way to navigate life in such a way that you are mindful of everything that affects you without being egotistical, without thinking that everything revolves around you. There are two totally different things in my eyes. They're almost diametrically opposed.
Yes.
And an example of this is your health. Nobody, if something develops, and you know, as we get older, something inevitably develops.
Wait, what?
If you,
He's saying we're gonna get sick, people.
something
I don't like
develops,
him
your
anymore.
your body's actually excellent at maintaining balance, but we beat the crap out of it. We don't necessarily give it the best nutrients. We load it with toxins, either intentionally or unintentionally. We don't get the rest that we need. We have higher stress levels, sedentary lifestyles. That's what I was saying, intentionally or unintentionally. So we don't always give our body what it needs to do what it's supposed to do, and that is one thing that cannabis does, is it brings it back to normal. And I would love to talk about that really quickly, but where I was going with all this is that
There's no quick here.
You've got to be your own doctor.
Yeah.
It's 2020.
Yes.
Ignorance is a choice
Yes.
in the information age. We're well into the information age, and ignorance is a choice.
That's kind of what I was saying with regard to what you're saying, to be a patient, how difficult
Exactly.
it is.
But everybody has this. Everybody has this, and you can access all sorts of information on this. It takes work, it takes effort, it takes time.
Yeah.
And I know everybody's short on time, but if
But
you don't do it,
what's your priority?
exactly.
Yeah.
If you don't do it, who's going to do it? Is
Right.
your doctor going to do it? Maybe you may
Is the
be.
bud tender going to do it?
Right.
Your doctor,
Wanna tell
you may
everybody
be
my issues.
1 out of 1,000 patients. He's not going to remember every detail about you, and
Yeah.
as much as I'm sure he genuinely cares about you, he's not going to care about you as much as you care about him.
Right.
If you die, he goes on.
Yes.
It barely affects him.
Many other patients.
Exactly. So you have got to take the mentality that it's on me. Now you can get help from these specialists.
Yeah.
You can get first and second and even third opinions, and you can try to use it all to put the pieces of the puzzle together. But at the end of the day, you've got to exercise your free will, and you've got to be willing to solve your problem.
I agree.
Or you will not solve your problem.
Yes,
Right?
we say this all the time. Absolutely.
If you're waiting for external people to
Yeah.
solve your problem, it's never going to get solved. It'll get masked.
Yeah.
It'll get, a little Band-Aid over it
Yeah.
maybe, but it
And
won't
you have
get
to be
solved.
willing to try different things. I think that's part of it too. Is like I think people sometimes think that it's a one-stop shop for fixing it. So like I am going to try a CBD topical, and it is going to fix all my woes. And I tried it, and it didn't work. Well, this CBD stuff just is all it's all hogwash. And it's like that's not how it really goes.
Unfortunately, you do probably have to invest in your health a little bit more as it pertains to trying cannabis or different cannabis products, because it's still a young industry.
And
it's
not
immature.
covered by insurance.
It's and you do have to invest out of pocket. That's the one reason
And
why
you can't return things.
Yeah.
Right.
Sometimes you can. You can in the CBD side of the industry. You can return things. There are product guarantees and things like that. But yeah, you gotta do your homework. And if the first thing you try doesn't work, you should never give up on it, because you maybe just didn't find the right combination, or maybe you were just unlucky and you went with the fanciest looking label, but it didn't actually have anything in it.
Or maybe it's not even the product for you too.
Correct.
And, I always use my mom. My poor mom is like my example for many of my conversations. But we had her try, I think, 4 different tinctures, maybe even 5. And at the end of the day, she didn't like tinctures. Like tinctures aren't for her. That doesn't mean that she won't ingest CBD. That doesn't mean that there's not 100 other ways that we can get her to get the CBD. Sure. But that method isn't for her. And as I had to listen, I had to not push on her what I thought was best for her. I had to hear what she was saying, which is sometimes very hard when we're trying to help people and think we know what's best. But I had to listen to what she was saying and then try those other methods, And so I think sometimes, again, as patients, we don't. It's expensive. I mean, 5 bottles of tinctures. You're talking about $200 at least, at least. And that's with my discounts, at least. And then to find out that she didn't like it, And so we're fortunate enough where she just, CBD, she sends it to me because she doesn't like it, and then we use it in our home. But if you're on a really tight budget, that could be a really big investment. And so trying to figure out what works or doesn't work sometimes is hard. I think
the other thing is people have accidents when they're learning.
Yes.
And can really have some very difficult experiences, which can scare them off from cannabis altogether.
Yes.
But that's why we made Undo.
Yes, right. Well,
so people can learn and experiment.
Yes, and do different things. And I think it's like I said, I think for patients it's hard. I think it's hard if you're in the industry. I think for patients it's just even harder.
But I think patients find a lot of hope. I think.
Absolutely. I think there's so much hope in
even when they're
medicine.
in the discovery stage, I think they get enough hope that they're willing to try another way because they think it's possible.
Yeah.
I think the best advice that I would give anybody as it pertains to this is find someone. Find someone who speaks intelligently about this stuff. Follow them. There are lots of nurses now talking about this. Nurses were some of the first ones to really study this stuff. And there's lots of...
There's nurse associations.
There's lots of quality resources out there. If you can't find one of them, there are people like me that put content out all the time. And, have the right intentions, but
Yeah.
you'll never know that until you follow them. You've got to follow them for a little while, and you've got to observe the consistency in their message before you can take advice from them, and that's just the way we should be doing things.
Step.
But
it's
the
a very good
information
step.
is out there, and there are credible people putting it out there, and you have to find someone.
What would be, do each one of you have like a favorite resource or a favorite place that you go to for your cannabis resources or information? Do you have a...
I have some recommendations.
Okay. Share with us.
Green Flower Media,
Okay.
which is learngreenflower.com.
Okay.
Very reliable resource for helping lay people to get scientific information in a way that's very understandable.
Okay.
It's accurate.
Okay.
Healer.com, wonderful doctor, Dustin Sulak in Maine.
Okay.
The Sacred Plant,
Okay.
very important program. That's by John Malanka. It focuses heavily on cancer and other biggies.
Okay. What about you?
Yeah, I have a few people that are on social media putting this content out that I have known for years and stand by. And one of them is Nurse Courtney Allen Gentry.
Okay.
She has a website. It's just syncs.org, which Syncs is CINCS, which is the Center for Integrative Nursing and Cannabinoid Sciences.
Wow.
She's on Instagram and Facebook, I believe, as Black Nurse Leader.
Okay.
And she is putting out wonderful content, unlike most. I don't mean just very different. It's a very, very holistic approach because although she is an RN, she's also a board certified holistic nursing coach, and she's one of a few dozen people in this country who's actually qualified to train other medical professionals, including physicians, on integrative cannabinoid medicine.
Wonderful.
She's fantastic. She presents you probably have bumped into at some of the events that you've gone into or seen her speak. Another one who's local here is cannabis nurse Heather. If you search, Heather Menace. If you search cannabis nurse Heather, you'll see her pop up, I'm sure, in social media.
She has a group called Cannabis Nurses Network.
Correct.
CNN.
Correct.
Yeah.
So there is great content out there.
Okay.
And like I said, you have just got to digest it. And the important thing is not just jump right in and digest the first person that looks good on camera or something like that. You've got to find people who resonate with you, who have consistency in their message. You've got to follow them a few times, listen to them do some Facebook Lives or read some of their posts, and you've got to make sure that you're comfortable with it. But there are people out there. I'd like to think I'm one of them. I don't have all those credentials at the back of my name, but it's something I'm very passionate about, and I've been guided by a lot of people I've followed and have literally been mentored in some respects by some of the revolutionaries in the medical field that are using integrative cannabis in their medicine. So, and I've mentioned a couple already, but that's, I think, what you got to do is you got to find people. There's consistency in their message. You got to educate yourself, and even all of us, even some of the names that we've named, we're still learning about it. We just discovered a new molecule that may be 30 times more stronger than THC, THCP, right? So
how many more letters are there going to be? I ask this all the time.
Yeah.
How many letters of the alphabet are we going to find?
A year or two ago, or maybe it was a little longer now, they had they're fairly certain, but they're still working on proving it, that they discovered a third endogenous cannabinoid. So we already know the CB1 and the CB2 receptors, but we're waiting on concrete evidence. But there is a lot there to suggest
that we actually have three.
We may have even more.
Yeah.
We may have even more. That's the whole.
That's right.
Yeah, that's the whole point. Is we're still learning about exactly what this does for us.
We're basically writing the history of cannabis right now because we
and it's
haven't really
take
been
a while.
able to do this before.
And
I'm
we're
not
also
very patient. I want to know.
We're also kind of suffering from amnesia because we forgot our history with cannabis. Except for a few of us trying to keep that alive, we've largely forgot about our history with cannabis.
Like you said, I don't know that it's even so much forgot as it was wiped away. So we weren't ever allowed to actually. It wasn't
exactly.
There, I think that's a huge part. I mean, our educational system has done a great job of making sure we didn't learn about this in school.
Yeah.
So.
Well, the interesting thing is that with all the information that's out there, and you and I both studying and never crossing paths specifically, we have exactly the same knowledge.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, absolutely.
You guys are my fact checkers.
That's why I say you got to look for consistency, because sometimes, if you've digested enough of this, you will inevitably see some inconsistencies.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're
right.
just honest mistakes or typos, but
Right.
other times they're inconsistencies because there's something.
Right, but so we really do know the real history as it's recorded
Exactly.
to date, and it can be recorded going forward. This information won't die because there's
Right.
enough of us knowing
Oh,
about
yeah.
Right.
it. You know,
Yep.
it's a
Yeah.
loud secret anymore. It's
Yes.
not a quiet secret.
Yes, goodness. I feel like it's getting late. It's getting towards the end of the night. So we didn't get to dive into your history at all yet, which I would like to do real quick before we end the show, because it'll just speak a little bit to your knowledge and who you are in the industry. So tell us a little bit, if you don't mind, about what you've been doing in your kind of your past in the cannabis industry, if you don't mind.
Well, I got into cannabis as an outgrowth of dealing with breast cancer. So in 2011, at the same time as the cannabis law was passed in Arizona, the medical law, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I thought, oh gosh, there's a silver lining to all this. I get to get a medical card.
Way to find the positive in cancer. I love you.
And I knew I've always been very holistic and very naturopathically oriented. I don't do hardly anything that's conventional in any way, especially medically. And so when I got diagnosed, I took it immediately as a life lesson. And I knew that I would get through it, no problem, and there would be much gained, and I would teach people. And I knew that right away. So I learned from the doctors what they wanted me to do, which was chemo and radiation and a mastectomy. Well, maybe let's get them both, just be safe side, take them both. And then reconstruction if you survive all that, and 5 years of tamoxifen. I was like, oh, good. No, thank you. And I did everything holistically, homeopathically. I had a homeopath, a naturopath. I did vitamin C IVs and special diet and exercise and everything. I mean, I made a project out of healing, and I learned much. And at that point in time in Arizona, we had very few options with regard to what was available in cannabis. I think we had flower and maybe flower.
Yeah, and
that was
you
it.
had to do donation swaps at the beginning.
Yeah.
Right? Does everyone remember
there
that?
weren't any dispensaries.
Yeah.
And, I knew about Rick Simpson oil, but it wasn't something that I had access to.
Yeah.
And I knew that the rest of what I was doing and my attitude and the healing, the forgiveness work and the spirituality and all that I was doing, I was positive that I was just going to get right through it. So month after month, I had a tumor that was 5 centimeters. I'd had it for 3 years. I knew it was there. I just also knew that it wasn't cancer. And at some point, at the latter part of that 3 years, I had a really bad situation with an ex, and I turned the tumor into cancer. And at that point, I realized I needed to deal with it. So I got the mammogram and the MRI, and they said, oh yeah, cancer, you got to do all these things. And I said, no, thank you. So month after month, I shrank the tumor using all these methods. And in the end, at 6 months, I had a lumpectomy. They removed a small tumor that was left. I was just done with it by that point in time. But I got very interested in cannabis along the way, that being the point of the story. So I was teaching people about how to deal with cancer in an alternative way, and I realized that it was the cannabis I was most fascinated by. So I started studying much. And then, like I said, I just started taking myself to conferences no matter what. I had no money. I'd crawl there. I'd hop on the back of a bus and hold on and go down the highway, stay in a garage, whatever I had to do to get there. And I learned and I studied, and I met this woman, Muffy, I mentioned earlier, and then she and I got into doing medical conferences. And
so you've actually hosted conferences and put on conferences
Yes.
for the medical cannabis community.
Marijuana for Medical Professionals is the name of the conference.
Beautiful.
3-day
When's your next one?
continuing medical education conferences, CME conferences. This is No bullshit around. It's like
When's the next
serious science. 21. January of 21
Perfect.
in Vegas. And
Yeah.
it will be the best one yet.
I'm going to be there.
Yes, you
Covering
will.
media.
Yes, you
For
will.
the Bud Show. With CR Network. So mark your calendar, girlfriend, by the way. Awesome.
So that's how I got into it. And then I started teaching seniors about cannabis as medicine. And while teaching, I met my partner, Jimmy, who I didn't know at the time. And he was teaching seniors about glaucoma and cannabis for medicine, and particularly glaucoma. And we met and we started teaching together and did this, these senior talks. And one day I said to Jimmy, I said, do you think you could figure out like a candidote? And he says, yeah, I think I can do that. And 4 months later, he had resolved the problem. He figured out exactly the formula that works like magic.
Yes.
And it basically uses our body's own natural chemistry to clear our heads.
I love it. Just great it's great for those of us who medicate regularly, but definitely really, really good in my opinion for those beginners because
cannabis safety.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just those of us who've been medicating for a long time. It's like I said, it's a great tolerance reset. But for me, I love it when I'm around beginners or newbies who medicate too much, and I can help them out. So
Yes.
I always have one in my purse, and it tends to get handed out to someone in need, and it's just someone. I feel like it's just a great product. So kudos to you for doing that.
Yeah, so we brought it to market, and now we're starting to sell it all over. It's undo.com, UNDOO.com,
Awesome.
and at undo420.
Awesome. Well, as we wrap up the night, because 2 hours goes way too fast,
Wow.
where do we find your business? Do we find you? Can we find you business-wise?
Yeah.
What would that be?
All around the country, you can find us at herbswift.com.
Awesome.
Herb, Herb, Swift, SWIFT.
Great name.
Thank you. We get you your herb swiftly. And then if you're in the Phoenix area, we're in the process of beta testing the delivery app now. So you can find the store marketplace in the iTunes and Android app store. Just search for Herb Swift.
Very cool. Have it delivered swiftly to your door? Swiftly and quickly to your door?
It's basically DoorDash, but for CBD right now, and then again, eventually when the climate is right, hopefully some THC as well.
Very cool.
THC side as well.
See, that grow.
And maybe some undo.
Yeah.
Undo Swift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Awesome. And we love the collaborations that happen. I love when you said that you love what happens from like the bridges you build basically and the connections that happen.
The organic connections.
Yeah, like to me, that's one of my favorite parts about
Yes.
this industry and being in this industry, especially now. I think it's just there's so much that's happening, and to see the web that's being weaved by all the relationships that get made, it's just really a blessing.
Well, you're in a particularly unique position of bringing people together.
Yes, I want to be clear because I have no knowledge of my own except for my own personal usage. So I don't claim to be someone who knows a lot about THC or CBD. I really try to tell people when they ask a lot of questions to go ask someone else who knows a lot more. But
Actually, you probably know a lot more than you think.
Probably, but I don't like to speak to it. And I really, I'm just, for me, I like to learn all the time. And so I love being able to have wonderful people like yourself who have the knowledge come in and really share it in a space where hopefully others are able to listen and feel that they can take it in too. Because as I said, as a patient, it's very, very intimidating. And even as a business owner, again, I don't touch the actual product. So even then, I'm in a different space sometimes than someone who actually touches hemp or cannabis in some way. Although I'm still discriminated against, like I touch cannabis just for note, but I don't. Business-wise, let me just be clear in where that discrimination was. But yeah, all right. So before we end out the night, because we technically have, I don't know, I can't really see. I think 4 minutes, 3.5, something like that. Is there any last words for those that might be listening? To wrap up the night.
I actually like to kind of explain cannabis and what phytocannabinoids do to our endocannabinoid system, because most people really don't know what it does.
Okay.
And there's a lot of people out there, and you probably have more experienced listeners as it pertains to cannabis use, but for those people who may be sharing this with their friends or their family that they're trying to expose to some of these ideas and some of this information, who are less experienced, I think it's really important that they understand it better. Everybody could stand to understand it better, I guess. But so I've, again, been fortunate enough to follow some physicians around, and they're very intelligent people, and one of them had an excellent allegory for how cannabis works. And so I think if I pass that on to people and I hear it come back to me one day, I'll know that it was a success. But it really does make sense. So some of us have been to, most of us have probably been to or know what an orchestra looks like. If you ever sat in the stands there, you can see there's different, they're grouped up by instrumentation sections. So you may have the brass over here and the strings and the percussion and so forth and so on. And then there's a little guy in a black tux with a little stick waving around and whacking it, right? And he's got music in front of them, and they all have different music in front of them. Well, the analogy is basically, where in this is the endocannabinoid system and what is it doing? So if you think of each instrumentation section as a different major system in your body, okay, so we'll say the nervous system, the reproductive system, the digestive system, the immune system, the lymphatic system, and so forth and so on. And then the conductor is the endocannabinoid system. This really is exactly what the conductor does and what the endocannabinoid system does when it's operating optimally, when it's functioning correctly, when it's supplemented, and when it has what it needs. But what it's doing is, he doesn't write the music. He's not even playing the music. He is just sensing everything that's going around and keeping everybody harmonically in balance. He's making sure the percussion section doesn't drown out the string, and this guy is in beat. This section is in beat with this section, and it's all in rhythm and in balance and in harmony. If he's not there, if he shows up sick or doesn't show up, he's out sick, they'll probably still play the music and we'll all recognize it, okay? But it's not going to have that harmonic balance that it has when the conductor is there. And anybody who has a lot of experience with music will know exactly what we're talking about. And so that's what this does. It literally receives information via transmitters and receptors, and it basically keeps everything in balance. So when people take different cannabis products, they may experience different things based on exactly what's present in that particular product. Maybe some people benefit with something that's more pure, like a pure THC distillate or pure CBD distillate, which is almost nothing, just CBD, maybe a few other things like plant lipids that are naturally occurring, maybe a couple flavonoids or terpenes, but mostly just CBD or THC. Or they may do much better with something that's much more essential. Still has chlorophyll in it, still has all the terpenes, all the, this stuff isn't as tasty because, it still has a lot of that stuff in it that gives it that really earthy, hempy taste. But it has everything. Some people benefit from an isolate, literally just pure molecule, nothing else in there. And the only way to know is to experiment with it a little bit. And you can always start small and build up. But what you'll notice is a lot of people, the most common report, see with THC, you feel it. It's psychoactive or euphoric. So everybody knows they're getting their dose of THC. But with CBD not being euphoric, people don't really know if it's working.
Right. And everyone thinks they don't need it. So like 20-year-olds, I don't need it. I don't need CBD.
So
I don't use that.
Because they don't know if it's working or not, they assume it's not working. A lot of people.
Old people. I'm serious. You should see the youngins. Go ahead. Sorry.
A lot of people assume it's not working. Well, what we found out is the most common feedback is actually when people have used it for a month or so, they bought something, like, you know what, I'll stick with it, I'll use it, and then they stop taking it. And it's because slowly but surely they were brought back to normal, to balance over the course of that month-long treatment. And then when they stopped taking it, it started to wear off, and they started to notice things. I'm a little achy, or my arthritis
That's
actually
what my mom will say. She'll notice
not
when
sleeping,
she doesn't have it.
I'm not sleeping as well. I have higher baseline anxiety on a daily basis or whatever. That's when they start to notice, is when they stop taking it, because it doesn't have that same initial effect that using a product with THC in it would have.
Interesting. Goodness, there's so much to learn. Okay, so the orchestra. That's
the orchestra.
All right,
the conductor is the endocannabinoid system.
All right.
And if the conductor is there, we're supplementing him. We're making sure he's got what he needs, his bottle of water, everything he needs. He's going to do a great job keeping everything in balance, in harmony. That's what the endocannabinoid system ultimately does. It's basically the master regulatory system of all the other major systems.
And no one ever taught us about this. So
And
go learn about your endocannabinoid system, which is what I tell most people is to start there, go learn about your own system.
If you think about it, that's exactly why so many people have the question, well, why does it seem to work for so many different things? Because it doesn't work like FDA medicines.
Right.
It doesn't just turn something on or off.
It goes where it's needed.
It stimulates a system to do what it's needed to do. A system that's typically not given everything it needs. It's given too much stress. It's not enough rest, not enough physical exercise.
You are so mean to yourself here. Too much stress, not enough sleep. I mean,
just like our culture.
Yeah, I know. That's our culture,
yes,
right?
Yeah,
our culture.
absolutely.
You got to hustle for the money.
Absolutely.
Right?
You got to hustle every day. So
absolutely. when you start to supplement it, you start to see differences.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, what do you got to round out our night? Anything? Are we good?
Thank you for doing the Bud Show.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, and I'm just going to end the night by reiterating the Bud card. So if anyone is watching or listening and you don't know about the Bud card, it is kind of like, nope, it's not kind of like, it is a savings program for cannabis. So our members save on all things cannabis, whether it's getting their MMJ card, THC where legal, or with their card, CBD everywhere, cannabis board games, Undo, other great products. I mean, we literally just added 5 over the last couple of days. We added, I'm going to give a shout out to a bunch of them right now. So we added Nugs Jewels, we added Mary Jane Smokeware, we added paraphernalia. No. I'm forgetting. I'm the worst. Okay, and then hold on.
Oh, you're too hard on yourself.
I know. But and then hold on. There was another one. Guida Gang CBD pasta sauce. So yes. Oh, we're so excited.
Growing so fast.
Yes, we're adding more. We're super excited. So if you don't know, go to www.thebudcard.org and check it out. Memberships are very affordable. First month is only $1, and then it's $10 or $20 a month after that. But you definitely get your savings. And that's it. So other than that, everyone, thank you so much for watching and or listening. Thank you to my guests for being here this evening. I know you have many places you could be on Monday night. And I thank you so much for sitting around this table and sharing your knowledge with not just me, but anyone who would listen. So thank you. And good night, everybody.
Night.
Good night.